Hi, everyone. As just mentioned, my name is Fletcher. I'm a PM at SafeGraph. We're a spatial data company, and I focus specifically on this team where we work on POIs and geometries, but I kind of have my hands in all the teams as well. And I'll be joined by my friend Bilal at the Advanced Analytics Group at Bain. I'll just go ahead and get started. So site selection, it's a term we hear often, but what does it really mean? I think it's changed a lot in the last 10 years, and certainly in the last 5. But traditionally, it means figuring out where to put sites, right? And that was done largely manually until not that long ago. And today we have this whole host of analytical frameworks, tools, platforms, and then a wide variety of data itself that can all come together to answer these sort of questions. So from the SafeGraph perspective, we're less concerned about which particular tools or workflows you are engaging with, and rather what can we do to make sure that when you're asking these questions, you're asking them upon the greatest possible data that you can find. So I'll kick the talk off with an analogy and then quickly hand it over to Bilal to give you an example of one way that you could be potentially interacting with location data to reach these insights. So the analogy that I use, and it's a bit of a cheesy one, is that of cars versus fuel. And I think in recent years, again, I mentioned particularly in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, I'd say, we've seen a ton of innovation on the car side of my analogy. So the cars being the analytical tools, the specific site selection platforms, or the spatial analytics platforms in general, whether that be hosted in the cloud or on your desktop, data science workflows and packages and libraries to support the types of grand queries that we want to ask of large data sets. All of the above, and then the academic side behind it, really fueling the ways that we think about asking these questions. There's been a ton of innovation there. On the fuel side, though, there hasn't been much. And as anyone who's ever driven a car knows, a car, even if it's a Maserati, is only valuable when it's got fuel to run on. So on the data side, we've seen really a dearth of innovation for the last decade. And oftentimes we're running these big, powerful machines of analytics on data that's frankly quite dated and unreliable. So at SafeGraph, we work really hard to drill down the basics and do them as best we can. I'll touch on that in a bit later, but I'll first turn it over to Bilal to talk about how they think of site selection on his team at Bain.
Thanks, Fletcher, for teeing up this topic very nicely for me. So for site selection, Bain has developed a tool called Vantage. And I'll kind of share 3 points that will give you a sense of the approach that we at Bain take towards the site selection. First, we use a much broader lens, strategic lens towards site selection. It's about growth. It's about growth strategy, and site selection is one part of this broader goal. For example, what we're looking at when we talk about growth strategy is what is the total headroom available for the client to grow? Which regions should they grow in? Which regions should they go in first? And once you identify the locations, which type of locations should you open up? So there's a whole broad range of a strategy that goes behind the growth that they are really kind of wanting to do. The second thing is Vantage is an intelligent leave behind tool. Intelligent because of course there is a machine learning aspect to it, but most importantly, it's a leave behind tool. And why is that important? That is important because growth doesn't happen overnight. It's a continuous process, right? You might come up with 500 new locations that the client can open up, but the client will take their time to open that up. They can't just open that up right away, right? And so for them to go on that journey, they need a tool that is kind of set up in their systems, and they can use them to kind of go through that growth period. And the third one, which I think is the most important one, is Vantage. What we do using Vantage is we co-create the machine learning aspect of the tool. Why is that important? I think that is very important because in the end, client needs to use that data, use that tool, and co-creating some of the aspect of the tool, just helps with that adoption. And also, client has the domain expertise, right? And what they can do when we kind of co-create with them, they can help us, get capture that one of those signals that can really help us kind of develop the models that'll give us the best results that we're looking forward to. If we go on to the next slide, Fletcher. So that was kind of the broad approach that we take through Vantage towards a site selection. Now, if you go under the hood of Vantage, the really kind of 5-step playbook or 6-step, 5 to 6 steps playbook that we have broadly, which can go under 5 broad categories: data, analytics, and visual dashboard. Data first. In this step, we use different data sets to identify and create very specific features for our model and for our client. Let's hold on to that data because I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about data, and data is extremely important here. The next step is analytics. Within analytics, there are really kind of 3 steps that happen. The first one is we use the variables that we've created in the last step to develop a model that will predict the performance. We use the same set of variables or slightly newer or different set of variables to create a second model that will kind of predict the cannibalization impact of the new stores on the current footprint. And then lastly, what we do is we use the output of both of those models to really fine tune the total number of sites that you can open up in the market. All of this is kind of feeds into this dashboard, which we've co-developed with the CARTO. It's on CARTO's platform, and really kind of the good thing about this dashboard is the development team from the client side who don't have the technical background can use this to rerun the white space. So this is linked up with all of their data sets on the back end. New kind of sites come online, they will be displayed in the dashboard. You can rerun it, the entire white space afterwards, to see where the new opportunities are. And when you zoom into certain opportunities, and you try to look for a site within the opportunity that has been identified in the dashboard, and if you don't find any location there, and you find a location, let's say 5 to 10 blocks away from the identified location or the site within the dashboard, what you can do within this dashboard is you can drop a pin there and run the performance and cannibalization impact model to give you the results exactly for that pin. And that's kind of the beauty of this dynamic dashboard that the client can use to look at the broader sites basically that are available to grow in. If you go to the next slide. So what I've discussed so far is kind of the overview of the tool and the approach that Bain takes towards site selection. Now let's come back to the data and talk a little bit more about it. It wouldn't come as a surprise to anybody on this call here that spatial data is plentiful. You have demographic data, you've got point of interest data, you've got human mobility data, traffic data, and the list goes on. And the funny thing is, behind every data set that is there are at least 10 different vendors who can provide that data set. So it becomes a challenge to really kind of evaluate your data sources. And what I'll do is I'll give you 3 kind of points that you can use to evaluate those data sets. They've worked well for me when I evaluate some of these vendors. First is evaluate how comprehensive the data sources are. For example, what regions are you going to are available or not available through this data set. So you're looking for that gap in the data set. Second is which data source is easy for me to get access to. As soon as I buy the data, how quickly can I get my hands on this data to really kind of start playing with it. The third one is, does the vendor makes it easy for me to use these data sets? If some of you have used these data sets, you'll realize these data sets are humongous, and you have to take time to really kind of play with this data set to get anything out of it. So our data vendors, they live and breathe this data on daily basis. Can they help us craft those features that we're trying to get out of it? So moving towards that middle column there, if we just pick up human mobility data that SafeGraph provides, it's a much broader kind of data set under which they can provide you a lot of different sub data sets. And really, if you look at it, you can use those data sets on their own or combine those data sets to really create and craft the features that you kind of want for basically for your modeling or for the analytics. Now, if I use the three kind of points that I talked earlier about in evaluating the data sets, you apply them here, and I think SafeGraph kind of shines on all three of those points. Their data sets are comprehensive. Their data sets, they give me pretty quick access to those data sets. You can get their data sets through the shop, their online portal, and also you can get their data sets through CARTO's data catalog. So the access to this data set is pretty quick, which is really great for me. But really, where they kind of outshine is the fact that they have notebooks available on their website that really kind of help me craft the variables that I want fairly quickly. So I am getting biggest bang for my buck because SafeGraph is helping me to quickly drive value out of their data sets, and that's the key, right? I'm looking for that value. And when we talk about value, the rightmost column there on the slide shows you how the value looks like. It's the meaningful features that you craft for your models or any type of analytics that you're doing. So what I've kind of listed there is a small list of features that you can create. There's all sorts of features that you can create with not just with SafeGraph, but some of the other data sets as well. So going after values is what is really important. So if there's one takeaway that I would leave you guys with, it would be to work with the vendors that can help you get the most value out of their data sets. And the best way to get value out of these data sets is to create meaningful features very specific to your use cases. So with that, let me hand it back to Fletcher to close the session up.
Thanks, Bilal. And I will second kind of your last point on what you want to be looking for if you are going to be building some sort of a site selection framework, whether you work with us or another provider. At least in the spatial component of the data that you're going to be wanting to bring in, there's a couple feature types that you're inevitably going to need to get your hands on. So I'll briefly cover what those are, and then touch to Bilal's point on some ancillary data sets that often provide additional color, and then kind of wrap it up with how you can use tools like CARTO and some others to access the data, again, whether it's ours or someone else's. So first and foremost, and it might seem like I'm stating the obvious, but you're going to want to have access to POI data, which at SafeGraph we call our core places product. Now that might sound pretty intuitive, but within the greater realm of POI data, there's a wide variety of cadences in terms of updates, quality expectations, geographic coverage, and to Bilal's point, cleanliness in the way that the data is explained or made accessible to you, as well as documentation, which is certainly an area I would encourage you all to never look past or expect to just be ready to go and legible. In terms of geometry, you'll often find folks asking questions like, okay, how many square feet of retail are there in the entirety of these three neighborhoods in the north side of Denver? And you can ask that sort of a question if you have access to building footprints and other polygons that represent square footage of particular features. Now at SafeGraph, we call our mobility product places, patterns. Patterns is aggregated and anonymized mobility data that you can intersect with the former two types of data that I mentioned, both points denoting where a particular location or series of locations and their types are, and then the associated geometries. And now you're really getting to the point where you can answer pretty meaningful hunches about where people are likely to spend their time and thus likely to spend money from a site selection perspective. And then finally, we have a product that's a little unique to SafeGraph called Neighborhood Patterns, which is another mobility product, whereas our flagship patterns product rolls into the POI itself. If you're doing something more exploratory and you aren't necessarily looking at particular types of locations, but rather want to know in general, what does mobility look like in this particular area, we actually roll in our neighborhood patterns that we affectionately call natterns at SafeGraph. all of that information into CBGs. And for those who've forgotten or are not familiar, a census block group is the smallest regional unit that the US Census publishes. They're generally containing between 600 and 3,000 people. So the level of fidelity that you can expect with those two products is quite high. And again, whether it's SafeGraph or elsewhere, you're really going to need, I would say, at minimum, the first of these three, or the first three of these four, to even get started. And then you're going to be asking other questions like, okay, what does spend look like here? And perhaps you'll go with a transaction provider, which I know Bain does, and you can do through the CARTO marketplace. Or maybe you want to have a greater understanding of traffic patterns in a particular area, and you can go with a traffic provider. But ultimately, it all starts with the locations, those locations being regularly updated, clean and reliable and legible. And that's really what we focus on over here at SafeGraph. Now, in terms of actually ingesting that data and making sense of it, you might be interacting with it programmatically, or you might be working in a platform such as CARTO, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with here at the conference. You'll see actual SafeGraph data loaded in here, and we're zoomed over Midtown here in New York City with a variety of points representing human mobility. You can access our data and many of the other types of data that you would want to be looping into a site selection process in their marketplace. I often use it just as kind of a bellwether for what's available out there, and to vet my own samples when I'm working with other folks in the industry. Lastly, if you do want to learn more about what we do specifically at SafeGraph, we are, as we like to say, only a data company. So by virtue of being hyper-focused on data and only data, we're quite proud of our output. If you ever want to learn more, check out a sample. You can go ahead and reach out to me directly at Fletcher at SafeGraph, and I'll connect you to my friends over on the sales team, or visit shop.safegraph.com and use this little code here to get a sample. And I'll turn it over to questions. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Fletcher and Bilal. By far, this is a use case and data category we hear about the most here at CARTO. So we have a couple of questions for you. With sustainability awareness increasing globally, are you seeing increased interest in understanding the accessibility of sites from a public transport perspective instead of purely driving?
Yeah, I can take that one. That's actually a really pertinent question. So we recently released a product that we just call points, or points POI, and those are geometryless points. So rather than, say, a Starbucks, for example, where there's a point in an associated geometry, think of ATMs or kiosks or what have you. And it's kind of this amalgamation of funky POIs that we originally weren't sure what to do with, and then we eventually kind of inadvertently found a pattern. And two of the types of data that you'll find in that product that are really valuable from a sustainability perspective are, to your point, transit POIs, so understanding what accessibility looks like in one neighborhood versus another, or planning your site selection based on accessibility to discourage people, or at least afford them the option of not driving. And another one that we're particularly excited about is electric vehicle charging stations. So we have, I believe, the strongest electric vehicle charging station sourcing in the spatial data market, and you can find both of those in that new product that we're releasing.
Awesome. And then I'm loving the focus on sustainability here, by the way, during this conference. We have a question for Bilal specifically. How do you handle zoning considerations in your analyses?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a tough one to handle. There are a couple of ways that we look at zoning. First of all, it's a from my perspective, it's slightly challenging data to come up with. But some of our clients have that data available with them, because they've opened up their sites taking the zoning into account, and so we use our clients and their ways of growing their site selections to incorporate that into some of our work. For example, in one of our QSR client that we worked with, what they were really wanting to do was open up their sites they wanted to make it very actionable when we kind of bring up some of the sites that they can use to open up new locations. And what we did there was we came around that zoning issue with the fact that we used seats which were more kind of a hub, commercial hub. So we looked at some of the big big box stores, some of the other similar QSRs, and maybe one of the other kind of commercial centers, and we try to identify where they are clustered together in broader regions, and those are kind of our seeds that we then use to evaluate which ones are really good for our client to open up, and which ones do not cut the line. So that's one way of kind of overcoming the zoning and using your client's information to kind of help them look at some of the sites that they can open up.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's all the time we actually have for questions on this session, but thank you again, Fletcher and Bilal.